Mrs. Cullen, we're ready when you are.
All right, thank you. We'll call the curriculum committee meeting to order. Since there's nobody signed up for public comment, I'll forego reading the public comment policy. And we'll go right into our agenda. The first item is the Western Lit Honors Curriculum with Mrs. Raper. Ms. Raper.
Hi, everybody. So I have with me Mr. Daniel Linsky and Mrs. Rachel Pulsford. They are the two teachers of Western Literature Honors, and they were the curriculum team who worked on this. So they're here to answer questions I may not be as well versed in because they're the experts. But I'll give you kind of an overview of this course, and then they'll kind of share with you what they're really excited about and the changes and the updates to the course, and then we can answer any questions. So this course, if you're looking at this page in particular, might look a little different than a lot of the other courses we presented because it's really only 3 mega units and then the final assessment, because they really looked at this course as a way to bring all of the rich texts together and put them together with themes. So that's why they're mega units, and you'll see multiple texts underneath. And I will show you kind of an example of that here. So you can see in this one unit, there are multiple texts that fall under the content because the teachers are going to address Frankenstein, which is the required text, and then one of 5 other choices. And then there's several optional choices as well. So just as a reminder, my courses are a little bit different with the required, optional, teacher choice, student choice. So required means everybody will read that text or interact with it. Required teacher choice is a list of teacher options that they can choose from that are required, and then optional are supplemental. If there's student choice in there, that means students would choose. So just to make sure we're on the same page there.
Mrs. Raber, can you
Yes.
give us an overview? Because I know that in some of the courses it has this teacher choose piece or
Yep.
as opposed to student choose. When it says teacher chooses one, what does that look like in the classroom? I don't know whether, but
Yep, so in this, for example, there's 5 teacher choices here. So what the teachers will do is generally have a discussion with their class about what each of those 5 texts includes. Topics, content, sensitive content if that's something they need to discuss, and their overall goals of the unit as it relates to those big ideas and essential questions, which they're already exploring for this unit in Frankenstein. And then students can, weigh in on what does that course want, or what does that class want to read. So second period might be different from third period in the same class, in the same course I should say, but they're all reading Frankenstein as their unifying text. This also gives us the option for if a class chooses a text, so let's say period 2 says Grendel is what they want to read, and one student does not want to read that, or a couple students, we have 4 other options already built into this unit that they can read as an alternate that still meet the goals of the unit in terms of big ideas, essential questions, content, and skills.
So just to be clear, if
Yes.
the teacher chooses one of those, the students can choose something else?
If that doesn't fit their needs, yes.
because
So-
all of the assignments can be done on any of those 5.
Correct.
Right, that's.
Yeah, which is why kind of in this course, those mega units are important because all the texts are unified by those themes that they're exploring.
And I know we've seen Atlas multiple times now, but can you scroll back down to the colors? Because I know this is new for us and new for the
Yep.
community. And so I just want everybody to take a look at the color piece. For some reason, the skills, the red and the blue are switched, but that'll only bother me, I guess. All right, there we go. But so as you go across and you think about like the big idea to the essential question to the skill to the content and read color to color, because it gives you a sense for what's happening in the classroom specific to that idea or that question or why that content, right? So for you to work forward or backwards, that color coding is there for that standpoint. And so I'm assuming that those big ideas are then done in Frankenstein and also done within whatever the teacher choice piece is. Is that what? Okay.
Yes. Some skills are covered in the content, or more than one skill could be covered in the content, and we don't rainbow color code.
Okay.
Like, I'm not gonna have green, blue, and red in in one sentence, so they choose the one that it's most applicable to, but there's a lot of crossover in the units.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So when the class is voting, and then I understand a student can choose to do a different book, some of them, like I know Beloved has some really, really graphic scenes. Does the parent, where are the parents notified that this may or may not be chosen and have the option of opting out? Or telling the child to opt out? Or is there?
We don't do a formal opt-out, like, sign a form if you want to opt in or out. They have the conversation about it, go home and kids can talk about that and come back to their teachers and absolutely say, I'm not comfortable with this text, or I'd like to explore a different one. And they always have that option. We have had in the past where we send a mass email home, this is the text that we're going to be covered. Of course, this is public access and it will always be there. So, and you can see the timeline when we're going to encounter this unit. So there's a bunch of different options for parents to see and weigh in and communicate with the teachers. These two in particular are very good at communicating with their students and families about text and what they're exploring.
Because what grades could take this?
So Western Literature Honors is for 12th grade seniors only. Mhm. And it's an honors level course. And it's a choice, right? So
Right.
our seniors have multiple classes in the reload department to choose from, so they would be choosing to take this course.
So not all seniors take
Not
this.
all seniors take this course.
Could you, at the back to school night, I guess, or part of whatever you send out, I understand that it's publicly
Whoops.
accessible and
Yes, sorry.
all of those things, but having it there and someone actually going and looking at it, I think it would be nice to be proactive in allowing people, giving them a heads up, about it. So, maybe that could be something that you would keep in mind when, before you get there, just not relying so much on the parents knowing where to go look and to find it, if you don't mind.
Yep, a text list we can easily attach to the
Yeah, and I do
syllabus.
that
They
every
include it in
back to
their
school
syllabus,
night.
too.
That's what I put on a PowerPoint. I had your daughter in class a couple years ago. Back to school night, I always put these are the works that we're doing because I think it is important for parents to know that stuff.
And how do you handle when it's teacher choice, or maybe in the old units, maybe there weren't? Did you have teacher choice in the past too, or is that something that's new?
We have some books because currently there are more books than we could possibly fit in a year that are approved for the Western Literature curriculum. So even though it doesn't say teacher choice in the existing curriculum, certainly teacher choice does exist
So you can't
within
do them
that.
all.
And Mr. Linsky and I do some things a little bit differently. We try to and we've really been working on our common assessments,
Right.
but there are certainly some books that he does that I don't do and vice versa at this point.
And what's the difference between this class and the current Western Lit honors class?
You two want to speak to that? You largely talked about the rewriting.
Yeah, I think what we did was we sat down, and a lot of this started in the spring of 2020, especially in that time when schools were closed and we weren't allowed to do new curriculum. One thing that I did with my classes at the time was I asked them to reflect on our current course and what do you think we're missing in Western literature. So when we started working with the curriculum people in the late spring of 2020 and we had those virtual in-service days where we were working with them, we really talked about those gaps there. And what has come up for me for years of teaching Western Lit since it was created in 2008, I've been off and on with that course, has been it hasn't really been Western enough, it's been predominantly British. So we've really wanted to focus on commentary that I have heard for years that Western Lit didn't have enough American literature in it because America is certainly a huge chunk of Western civilization. So over the years we have pulled some things that the 10th grade American Lit teachers had stopped teaching, so they'd been approved, like adding some Faulkner in there, but we really wanted to make sure there was another like strong core American book in there. So if you look at the teacher courses, the 3 that are not in there right now are all by American authors. We also wanted to make a concerted effort to have something a little bit more contemporary, and that's where Beloved and Stephen King came in because they are both more contemporary authors.
I might also add, largely, as Rachel said, the texts had already been approved. What we're doing now with this renewal is giving them purpose. We're shaping the course and giving it form a little bit, and that's why you see it broken up into these 3 mega units. So instead of just going from book with its idea to another book with its own skills and ideas to another book and its own skills and ideas, this is a course that's tackling the Western canon, really. So in order to approach something as vast and broad as that, we've taken the books that were already pre-existent and sort of fit them into this larger idea, shaped around different types of struggle.
Thank you.
And where did that come from, the struggle themes? So you have internal and, what's the other one?
Manifestation
Um,
of struggles, manifestation of struggles and
Internal struggles.
Internal, yeah. So I mean, I guess like 2/3, more than 2/3 is focused on struggles. I was curious about that, the development of the course.
Sure. So we were looking for what was common among the texts that we have. Because like I said, the Western Canon is such a broad, disparate set of texts. There's comedies in there. There's things that qualify as horror in there. So we were looking, how can we contextualize this for students in a way that each book, like I said, has some sort of function. And just about every book has conflict. So struggle can be read as conflict, essentially. When you see manifestation of struggle, those are struggles that, whether a character's having them, internally or externally, they're manifesting externally. By contrast, the internal struggles might be a character confronting something that they're dealing with inside of personally. Satire and comedy also contain struggle, but the lens at which we're looking at satire and comedy is just a different approach.
Right. And so, I mean, I'm not familiar with all of the books that are in there. Is it a mixture of, I guess, when I saw that it was so much struggle, to me that meant like, oh, there's just a lot of darkness.
And we played around with the wording with that
Okay.
a lot. And
Yeah.
honestly, we're
So-
not married to that wording.
Okay.
I think and there was another teacher who since retired involved in the beginning of the process. We really kept on coming back to the idea that literature largely is a vessel for people to try to figure out who they are and their struggle to find their own place in the world. And I think that's especially pertinent for high school seniors who are preparing to go out into the world the next year. So like the internal struggle is more characters like Hamlet, who everything is in his head and he's just struggling to figure out what he has to do. Whereas the manifestation of struggles is Frankenstein's monster, where Victor Frankenstein is having the same struggle to figure out who he is and what he wants to do with the world. But instead of soliloquizing to himself, he's literally making a monster. And then the other teacher choices are all looking at how the setting is kind of a vessel for that struggle that's really internal, manifesting in that way. The satire and comedy is kind of looking at how when people aren't really sure how to handle those struggles, they cope with it in different ways by addressing it through satire or by sometimes having a laugh at it, because I think that literature can be, and kids should see that literature can be and is often very fun as well.
Yeah, fun and lighthearted. That's, I guess,
Yes.
that's, okay, good.
So then the way, when you set up, you said like Frankenstein you do all together as a group, and is that kind of like modeling to probably like how when they go and they choose their book, and then if a group, like you said, like if majority vote for one and a few vote for the other, how does that play out then? They are like, students are to read that on their own and then come back and they have group discussions and then they do the assignments within the classroom or homework time, is that how it typically plays out?
So if we had students who did not want to participate in the other text that the majority of the class was doing, they can still participate in the activities, the discussions, the assessments
Okay.
with everybody else. They're just using a different text to engage in it, but that's why they're all related by theme. Because you can have a conversation about
Okay.
100 different texts if we're all looking at the same theme and using the same lenses, and the content and skills is where those are all unified. They're practicing the same skills in a different text.
Okay, so then there is the same thing. What is that thing, if you don't mind me asking, throughout all the books that you are trying to guess, project to the kids and have them walk away with that lesson learned?
Well, largely the theme goes into different ways struggle appears, either internally, externally, or how a character might approach it through satire and comedy. Now, the one unit in which we do have that teacher choice element, there's themes that are more specific to those particular texts, and those are the things that appear in the essential questions in that unit. But they are transferable across multiple texts.
And then I just have another question more specifically to the internal struggles with, I think it was the questions or the big ideas, where there seems to be like a focus a lot on like apply a feminist literary lens to the awakening, As I Lie, and then I believe there's like apply a feminist lens to like Hamlet, I think that as well.
Mhm.
And I guess my question is mainly, what was the purpose of like choosing to look through that specific lens? In the other class that I know we didn't get to yet, there's that kind of focus as well. So just kind of figuring out like why does there have to be that lens, and like what was the purpose behind choosing that?
So Mr. Lindsay also teaches AP Lit, which is the next course where that also appears. So I'm gonna let him answer what is the feminist lens that we're even discussing, and then what the purpose of is in both of those classes. Although those classes are not taken by the same group of students, so we can talk about that as well. If you take Western Literature Honors, you're not taking AP Lit because most of those kids are seniors, so they're taking one or the other. So they're not seeing it twice, essentially. But go ahead and you want to talk about the feminist lens.
Sure, so that's a good question. The whole goal with adding the feminist lens to 3 texts in this particular unit, that they aren't all written by women or they don't necessarily have women as main characters, is to introduce the idea of a literary lens in general. So feminism is, or rather feminist literary lens, which is different from feminism, is a way to frame a text for a reader. So it gives them a particular perspective for them to look at. And most of these students are on their way to college taking a senior honors level course where they're going to be introduced to a ton of literary lenses, deconstructionism, new criticism, new historicism. But all of that stuff would be totally blindsiding for a high schooler. So that's why we chose feminist literary lens, to show, like, here's how you can look at a character in, say, Hamlet, written by a guy. Main character is a guy, but nonetheless you can look at Ophelia and see, okay, how is the greater plot of the story affecting this particular character? It allows them to focus on something. That's the purpose of one of these lenses. Likewise with As I Lay Dying, or even Frankenstein, you can look at. That's written by a woman but has no major female characters in it. So you can still ask, why is it that Mary Shelley decided to do that? Because the whole point of a feminist literary lens isn't necessarily to apply some sort of preconceived notion of what feminism means. It's really to look at a text and determine what sort of truth or realness does it reveal about what it might like to be a woman. So using that, we can model what the function of a literary lens is in general.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that, especially like with what you said about the preconceived, that sometimes where I was looking at it and thinking, is
Sure.
that? So I appreciate.
Yeah.
Sarah, could you scroll down just a little, because I think here's where the color helps us. Like if you could,
yes.
well, if you can get to the top of the skills, we made it look, because like number 1, number 6, and number 11 really all are basically the exact same skill, but 3 different pieces of literature.
Yep.
Where then if you look under the content, under the awakening, that green matches up specifically to the main character or the character Edna. And I'm not familiar with the awakening, but in terms of, that's what you're kind of talking about, Mr. Linsky, right? In terms
Yes.
of, then that Edna becomes the lens as part of that part of the conversation, as well as then down As I Lay Dying. It's a similar piece in terms of the female characters, but it has more to do with societal expectations because of the piece of literature that it's in. Okay.
This is also a good example of where there's no green in Hamlet, but there is green skill about applying a feminine, but that's because Ophelia's struggles, this content right here, is more focused on, and we had to pick a color.
Yeah.
So it's still there, but that's just where the color coding gets a little complicated.
It's a
So
greenish
It's a good
shade of
example
blue.
of all 3 things.
Right.
It's a green family.
Just to clarify, Jordan Pearson, the feminist literary lens really isn't about the feminist movement, you're saying? It's something different.
No, there are lots of schools of literary criticism, and in a college level course, kids would definitely be exposed to many of them. Feminist literary criticism is probably the most accessible to a high school student, because when you get into new criticism and, you know, postmodern criticism and stuff like that, it's a little bit too above them. So it's a good entry level, so we can look at like how we can introduce literary criticism as a concept to kids before we dive into the more advanced concepts.
And is this course focused on a certain period of time only, like, or it could be in theory any period of time?
it could be in theory anything in the Western canon. The earliest is Beowulf excerpts, and then pending approval, we would have some things from the late 20th century in there.
Does anything within our curriculum combine history and English together? Where you'll have, while you're studying a particular book, it's mapping the study of that period of time in history?
In this particular course or in
Or
general?
just in general, I just wondered.
There are definitely courses where that does happen because we haven't had Atlas to put all of our curriculum in. Once we have that, we can pull kind of those reports at the same time and look where those things could be more aligned and be able to do that. We've started that process between social studies and English, especially at the high school level, because it only enriches what everybody's doing.
Right.
But it doesn't always work out that way. With senior classes too, it's a little bit more difficult because just because you take Western Literature Honors doesn't mean you're taking the social studies course where that might be covered. So that becomes a little more difficult, but as you look at the earlier years at the high school, it's a lot easier to make those adjustments.
Because Dr. Shad, you want to talk a little bit about the humanities program, because those are required courses where that actually happens.
Yes, that's
right?
coming up.
When they
So-
were developed, you can talk about that, Mrs. Draper.
So in ninth grade, we have a humanities course that you have to take humanities English honors and humanities social studies honors, and it's really treated as a block. So those teachers actually co-plan, they co-teach, they do projects together, it's very project-based, all of that, and everything is aligned. So they are actually renewing that course this year as well, hopefully both of those will go up at the same time, because you'll see they're completely aligned. They were actually, to your point, writing them separately, and said, we need to dissolve one of these and write it as humanities, because we teach it together and everything needs to go
That's an
together.
honors course, or it's
It's an
regular-
honors, yeah,
Okay.
it's an honors level course.
And it's easier in ninth grade because those courses are required.
Yep.
And so you can guarantee that all students are taking that, as opposed to in 12th grade. The mix of what they'd be taking in English and social studies would be very great.
Any other questions about this course before we
Anyone?
see AP? Okay.
I guess we're moving on. So the next is AP Lit.
So unlike Western, this has 12 units. And I'm really gonna let Mr. Linsky talk about this course because when he took over this course was it 2 years ago at this point?
Last year, yeah.
He really took it in a different direction to make sure it was aligned with the AP Literature and Composition exam in terms of the amount of time they're spending in each section, really broke it up into thirds to ensure that students were prepared to spend the allotted amount of time in exploring each of these topics and genres so that they're prepared for the exam, while also, of course, ensuring they're getting the content skills, the exposure to text and writing that we think is important in this course. What do you want to point out first?
Sure.
I'll
So,
keep it there.
sure.
I want to navigate you.
Whereas the last course we just looked at was built around 3 greater themes, this is built around what the AP test is asking for you. Because at the end of the day, what I'm looking for is my students to earn that college credit. That being said, so this is a skill-based course rather than a theme-based course. Nonetheless, I'm including themes to anchor each of the skills in each of these units. And the way these units are organized, in equal thirds, it goes a round of short stories, followed by a round of poetry, followed by one longer piece of fiction or drama. You go through that cycle, and then you do it 2 more times under different sets of themes. But each time the same skills are being used and strengthened until ultimately by the time you get to like this point in the school year, students are pretty much ready for the test.
Do you want to highlight the novel project?
Sure.
I know you do.
Sure. Okay, so the novel project is a behemoth sitting at the end of this unit where, I mean, they've gone through the cycle 3 times now by the time they hit this. And so they are going to be ideally experts upon a novel of their own choosing. Now, from my selection, and I've gotten a large selection here, it's over 40 texts. Each student is choosing their own work. And they're going to become masters of that particular work. And ideally at the end of the year, after the AP test is over, they're essentially teaching the class that text. It's truncated, of course. They only have a day to do it, but they're delivering lessons on the class that they've essentially seen me model over the course of the year. in addition to what adds up to around 15 written pages across different papers that they're writing on these novels. And then scattered throughout the course year, a Friday every now and then, I'm conferencing with them and making sure this thing is staying on track. It's not unloaded upon them at the end of the year. This is something that they work on from around Christmas time until it's ready to go at the end.
Does anybody have any questions about the AP Lit? Jordan, did you?
Yeah, I did just have it, and again, not picking it apart, but just looking at
Absolutely.
like, now's the time to ask questions, right? So, looking at unit 4, where it's, the other in short stories.
Sure.
So, the questions, the big questions were like, characters can be considered othered by society, a character's setting reflects societal beliefs, a character who is considered an other by society can use the experience to develop. And I didn't write down the questions that then go with it, but I guess my question is, how is othered being presented to students? And I guess my concern with just looking at it, like if I'm just a parent and I'm looking at this, is it something that could possibly marginalize the students more and maybe make them think of their own insignificance heavier? I think like that heavy piece, I know they're older, it's an elective, they can choose it, but just seeing how it's being, I guess, presented to them, not knowing much of how the unit gets out.
Sure. So the idea of a character that might be different from what's going on in society, it's whatever's separating that character from the larger society as a whole. Now that may change depending on how you're defining society. So for example, in Sonny's Blues, our character is an other, quote unquote, compared to the rest of his family because Sonny is a drug addict. That has set him apart from the rest of his family. So that's how he's being thought of as an other there. In Paul's case, Paul's an introvert in an extroverted world. So yes, this would highlight what it might be about a student that they themselves might feel separate from whatever they are recognizing as society, but in a way that contextualizes it as a positive ultimately. Because each of these 3 texts that are chosen, regardless of whether they have a happy ending or not, at least have signposts for what could be done to reframe what might be othering about you as a positive.
Right. Right. Melissa, I
Sure.
think that's definitely good, like looking at things that persevere with you and yeah, awesome. Okay,
Mhm.
great. Thank
Is
you.
that phrase straight from AP? The phrase of othered? Because I know this is an AP curriculum.
that's what I
So in
was
terms of from the language, I don't know how much of this is straight from AP in terms of that's the language they use.
Most of what you're seeing here came from the College Board. Like the skills, for example, are almost verbatim from the College Board. And like I said, I was building this course around what the College Board was giving me. Now, I am not the inventor of that term, but if its origin is the College Board or another educational text, I'm not sure what the point of origin was, but it's something that has fluttered around before. And was definitely being used in my AP training last year. It came up multiple times. But whether it originated with the College Board, I can't say with certainty.
I think I've heard, we've heard it in other places besides College Board. But I'll just point out again, I think everybody probably knows, but to just restate that AP courses, they are designed for the purpose of having the students perform well on the AP exam. So whereas we would say in normal circumstances, we shouldn't teach to a test with AP. I just want to say that just, it bears repeating.
That's what you signed up for.
It's what you're signing up for, yes. It also prepares you all for just college in general, I think, but, okay. So are there any other questions? Speaking of grammar.
Can I ask about, I mean, it can be controversial, the book, The Song of Solomon on there. I noticed it's required, but it's just excerpts from the book, pages 1 and 2.
Which unit are you in, just so I can pull it up?
What is
There's so many texts in this. Remember what unit it is?
I think it's the resource list,
Oh, yes, the full
text list, yeah.
I can explain to you this.
Oh, I found it. By me, I mean,
It's
Yeah,
under a
found
new
it.
look at new found it.
yeah.
New criticism.
I'll stop checking.
Thanks for your,
Uh-huh.
oh, go ahead, sorry.
Sure. So the function of those 2 pages of Song of Solomon, and it's just the first 2 pages of that text,
Okay.
is to specifically hone in on the syntax of a story. So the syntax refers to not what is written and the symbolism and things like that, but specifically the way it's written. Why are the sentences this long? Why is it, or why is there repetition? Why is there parallelism? So, again, devoid of symbolism or plot, and that's why I'm only focusing it on 2 pages. This is an exercise in getting students to understand why a text is written the way it is. So there is no plot really for the first 2 pages of this. This is basically pinpointing a very specific skill that will appear on the AP test and getting them to produce a paper out of it. I choose the excerpt from Song of Solomon because Toni Morrison is very unique with her syntax. It gives them in just 2 pages a lot of material to work with.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
And I just want to remind, because we've talked about this a couple times from a community standpoint, that we, especially with literature-based courses, have slowed down the curriculum process on purpose to add an extra month for that. And so these 2 courses will not be on the April board meeting. These will be considered in May as long as the board is comfortable moving them forward, because there is a lot of literature to interact with, right? In most courses, there isn't this level of detail in terms of the number of things that are attached to it. So we want the board, but also the community to have enough time to be able to do that. So the Atlas is live, links are there, the lists are there. I tried a little explanation in terms of what required means, teacher choice, and things like that. So if there is additional feedback, we can come back next month. If not, we'll be comfortable and we can move it forward in May. So really appreciate Mr. Linsky and Ms. Poles for coming tonight
Yes,
and
thank
helping
you.
explain that to us. So thank you.
I think the conversations are helpful, the questions, and people can just look at this meeting and they might have the same questions, so we appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thank you both.
All right.
Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds.
So then Mr. Vogel, discrete math honors.
Have to follow the elephants that goes there.
Yes.
I did that on purpose.
Thank you.
So I do want to give a shout out to the people that were involved in discrete math, because it's a course that a lot of people don't even understand or know about in math. So, and I'm sure I'm going to hear from some people that were probably involved with it, and I'm not going to mention their names. Mrs. Clemmer, the data coach, was a big part of the course over the years, and Mrs. Lydia Rayburn Hunter, who's like a dynamo in putting this curriculum together. She really put together, made it what I think is a very interesting course, one of the more interesting courses that you could take in mathematics. Very interesting course. Made it even more interesting. And I'm gonna, when I looked at how I was gonna describe this course, I actually looked up about 5 or 6 different websites looking for a description of discrete math
Oh, good.
that would make sense to you. So I'm gonna read this, and then I'm probably gonna have to explain it anyhow, but we're gonna try here. So it's a study of mathematical structures that are countable or otherwise distinct and separable. How's that? So basically, to break it down into some more, a little bit more basic language, discrete structures, they can be counted, arranged, placed in sets, put into ratios with one another. The whole course looks at topics, and this is where I find this so interesting, and you mentioned right away before we even started, game theory, where it looks at like max payoffs and looking at rules and outcomes. That's just, game theory by itself could be a course. And then we go into things like voting methods, which talks about something that people don't know a lot about, is the Electoral College. Every time I hear or see tweets and people talking about the popular vote, I bristle, and like they say, like, let's get rid of the electoral college. It just tells me they really don't understand it, and this course really delves into it and looks at how the representation is, and the foresight of the forefathers years ago to even look at the idea of electoral college. So to me, that's a very exciting thing. And we look at, we also have, if you've looked closely at the voting methods, you'll see that there's a podcast from Freakonomics, which is really interesting. It involves, what's neat is the balance involved in this too, is there's a couple of congressmen that are Democrats, there's a couple congressmen that are Republicans, and there's several authors that are involved in the same thing there, so their unique perspective on that, so that's kind of interesting. Then we go into apportionment, which is related to the voting, but it really is kind of neat in terms of they look at the proportional number of members each U.S. state sends to the House of Representatives. Again, the Electoral College and how it compares to the popular vote. Apportionment using 6 different methods, and I'm afraid to even say them because you might ask me for an example, and I'm not going to be able to give you one. With a Hamilton, Jefferson, Adams, Webster, Hill, and quota. I mean, like, it's just describing the collection methods used for the U.S. Census. So there are a lot of things in just those 2 units alone that we talk about a lot, you see out there, but there's a largely, it's largely like a lot of not understanding. This course clears that up. It's a course that I think so many people would be really interested to take, they just don't know about it. We also look at the fair division, which talks about account evaluation by stakeholders. And that's always an interesting thing. You might hear something similar to account valuations or evaluations if you watched, what's Mark Friedman's show?
Oh, just Shark Tank?
Yeah, they talk about valuations and things like that.
Yeah.
They'll always talk about 2.5, you know, that kind of thing. So,
Okay.
so individuals value items differently in fair division, and they really go into that. One of the more interesting things, and one of the reasons why discrete is growing, is the growth of digital devices like computers. The growth, it didn't just happen, it's been going on for about 40 years. But we look at Boolean operators, which basically is how to look at mathematical arguments, and involves ands and ors, and how to best frame searches. And it doesn't seem mathematical, but the logic of it is. So you can do searches, really intricate searches based on that. Graph theory, which again, to me, that's a course that can stand, a unit that can stand on its own as a course. When you're looking at it, it offers a flexible method of representing information that allows us to apply math strategies to solve problems, which to me is really neat, because if you've ever looked at a Euler circuit, what that basically is how can you complete a circuit without ever repeating a particular side or line. Königsberg bridge problem is one that's pretty famous, among math people. I'm sorry.
I was with you at the Electoral College. My social studies.
So, but there's 2 more units I really want to get into. I'm trying to break it down in a little more basic language that makes sense to people. Scheduling, bin packing methods, most efficient scheduling in terms of scheduling algorithms to help organize projects. There's a lot.
The bus
scheduling.
The bus
Did you work on
yeah.
So, scheduling is so important that, 35 years ago, I went for a job as a tool and die manager, and they had a written test, and then they had the tool and die piece. The tool and die piece I had absolutely no understanding about. But they started off with the test piece first, and what I did is they had about scheduling and efficiency, so I developed an algorithm on how they could best use their resources, so they were actually using real problems. So they brought me back for the interview piece of it because of that. And then they started asking me tool and die questions, which means they didn't hire me. But they did actually use the scheduling algorithm that I developed, because I was dumb enough at the time to just say, yeah, you can use it, rather than copywriting or trademarking or that kind of thing. So, but either way, the idea of the efficient algorithm, how many businesses don't run totally efficiently given the resources that are available, and so, and then the final unit that to me is a grabber too, is coding and cryptography. And just to see some of these businesses have been crippled from, Russian hackers and that kind of thing as of recent vintage. The idea of decrypting becomes more sophisticated, more advanced methods of encrypting become necessary. So that's one of the things that I think is just so interesting about this course. So, I mean, if there's one course that I think that really should grab people and kind of excite them, and is this course. And I think that even me hearing myself talk about this, I think I have to talk to the counselors and kind of really get with them one time and just kind of say, this is what this course is, and this is what.
So what grade could take this?
Generally, mostly it's 85% seniors, about 15% juniors, but juniors can take it. It's just, there is a certain level of math that at times in this course, most of the course you can get as long as you have some algebras under your belt, but there is a certain amount that we are asking a little bit higher math to get there.
Okay, and so a student would know that if they, so they wouldn't go into this course not knowing that they needed that?
Now, because right now, I mean, I'd like to open it up a little more than it is. I can hear the teachers yelling at me right now for that camera. But right now, there's only probably about 40, 50 kids max that usually take it on a yearly basis. It's just because it's an unknown and it's just.
Yeah,
I think-
about the marketing of
So,
it, I don't know.
market, and
Which is
I'm
probably on
thinking,
me.
do we have a course, like a course fair where you could, before they pick their courses, sorry, this is a totally off topic,
Yeah.
but where you could pitch your discrete math, or, teachers could talk about it, because seeing it in the catalog is one
Right.
thing, but
Yeah.
hearing you talk about it and going through what you could learn, I guess you could make like a display or something of what they could learn. I don't know if we have time. That's,
We have the teachers
but-
do it in the department.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
the 11th grade teachers will go over all the 12th grade course options. So they hear them, but they don't hear them as enthusiastically as this, because
Like a
they don't
pitch.
know the courses they don't teach as well as the ones they do. So it's something to think about, maybe flipping that almost. Let the 12th grade teachers talk about the courses, or just let Mr. Vogel do all the math, I'm not sure. But,
And even
Yeah.
helping the parent, like, the parents understand it too, 'cause sometimes the kids, they don't know what they don't know, and if the parent can understand that, because even, I don't know, like, you take this instead of calc, like, I wonder, is that what would happen, or if parents even know, if my kid doesn't take calculus, is that bad, and they take this instead, like,
I think we have to look more at exactly what a kid wants out of the end of their high school experience, and also what they're looking ahead to do in college to really kind of guide them, or best describe what it is they might need. And maybe I need to do a better job in terms of that, because I could make, if I was talking about Algebra 1, I get the same kind of level of excitement that maybe not everybody feels, and I don't understand. So.
We're all different.
But this is one of those courses that, nobody takes this usually that doesn't, that they get the 3 years already that they need.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody that doesn't have the 3 years isn't looking to take discrete math.
okay.
But those that are taken, I would love to see it increase in terms of the ones that are already taking the calculus or taking the statistics. I would love to see that increase there, because it really is a great course. It's just an unknown course, and maybe we do have to sell it better. And
Maybe you can get on morning announcements and get everybody.
Yeah, get on
Okay.
the radio.
The math course of the week.
Yeah.
Right. the
I
lead
can
program.
on the radio.
Mr. Vogel, that corner.
Seriously, yes.
Yeah.
But Mr. Vogel, it might be a valuable conversation to have with not just the teachers in terms of what do kids say about it, right? Why are 40 signing up for it as opposed to, as well as the counselors, because the counselors are doing a lot of
And
that.
that's what.
Talking to students about what's coming next, not just in math, but also across all their courses they think about, college or career.
I do think that's what I'm gonna need to do, because one of the things I wanna do with the counselors as well is talk about, the personal finance and those options, that honors, how it goes together with the business. We only want them taking one, not multiple,
Right.
multiple. At the same time, I wanna kind of outline some courses that are less well-known, or statistics and problems,
Yeah, I mean, when I see it as the application of teaching them how to think critically, like, these are so,
Yes,
Mhm.
this is
so
fascinating.
important to understand how you use math this way, and I see it as critical thinking. It's not
Yeah.
just learning the language, it's what do I do with this? And they don't see that a lot
Well, it
of
makes it
times.
relevant to them.
Yeah.
Every one of my kids has said, I don't know why I have to waste my time learning this, I'll never ever use it again. And it's hard to argue that for like pre-calc or algebra too, because you might not. This makes it completely relevant to everyday life, whether they know it or not yet, but.
The first part hurts me a little bit, but I understand.
I love math, that hurts
But-
me too, but I've heard a lot of kids say it.
This here is, and you actually said it better than I did in terms of the critical thinking
Right.
aspect of it and what goes into this. This course just excites me to even look at, you know?
Well,
So-
yeah, but when I just looked at the name, I had no idea until
Yeah.
you just explained it, and now I'm fascinated. I can think of a couple people that might enjoy
We have
it.
to rebrand it.
So, yes, we're gonna,
Well,
Christine's gonna market it.
It is something we were looking at, because we were looking at this course in terms of how we can title it differently, and we did look, and we even looked at splitting it, because there's two names, like, if we called it game theory and graph theory, this particular game theory, it would really kind of, although, if we just called the course game theory with all the types of units we have in there, that's not fair.
Yeah.
But we were looking at ways to, but if you look up discrete math, I mean, discrete math is not in a lot of high schools. So I give us credit for teaching a course like this. You'll see it in a lot of colleges, and sometimes, like even when I took it in college, it was a good month before I even realized what this course was about. I was doing it because I was asked to do it, and then I was like, oh, I get this. And then it was altogether different. So it's really good that we are doing it. I can hear that in my head right now that I have to reach out to counselors, and I do have to over time. We have to talk about this course in a different way.
Yeah, and going, I guess, like Christine was sort of saying, parents knowing whether it would be good for the student to take this or not, and then also for the counselors, and I'm thinking of college admissions people, when they see that Penridge has discrete math, or that a student took discrete math, how does a college admissions counselor view it? Is it a valuable thing? Is it like a feather in our cap? Like, I guess it is, you just said, but that was something, just be prepared to explain it in that way, because it's gonna be important,
Yeah.
you know?
It just doesn't have the teeth of the AP, like calc goes to the
Mhm.
AP. You get the
Yeah.
AP credits. It doesn't have that teeth to it.
Well, it could be, you know,
Maybe stats.
something for, it is different, and now that you've explained it, if I were an admissions counselor, I don't know, I think it would be a selling point, you know, a plus for us, so. Anyone else? We're all gonna sign up.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Booth.
I love a good graph. It's too bad Mr. Daubert's not here, he would have cheered for graph theory. We did have one update. Right, Dr.
Sorry,
Scheid, did you
yes.
want to?
Sure, right when you're- I'm sorry. Yes, Mrs. Collin. The last curriculum meeting, we presented journalism honors, and there was some discussion and some feedback. And Mrs. Raber's going to talk about the way that we have kind of restructured the podcasts, or the recommended ones, in terms of category that made sense, so.
So this isn't the whole course, this is just
No,
the
the
podcast piece,
podcast.
is that right? Okay.
This is the social media 21st century, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, 21st century social media unit, where they're looking at blogs, TED Talks, and podcasting. And the students are creating their own series of 3 15-minute podcasts. So the goal of providing them with mentor podcasts was not for content, but really was for structure. So if you want to include interviews in your podcast, here are some podcasters who do a really nice job interviewing. If you're looking to do just an informational podcast, here are some that really fit those. So we went back and looked at what are the ultimate goals of the unit, which is what I just relayed, and how can we categorize those and make it clearer in this mentor podcast list to give to students. So that's what you see up here, which is LinkedIn Atlas now. So it's categorized informational, and there's 4 options with a little description there. Options if you're looking for interviews, as well as tutorials. Tutorials are very popular with the students in this course to do in their podcasts, and that's just an extra page. So those are just links. So we really narrowed it down to under those 3 categories, which podcasts or resources really demonstrate the best use of them so students can emulate them when they do their own. Again, this is the unit where they can choose to look at none of these if they want, and they can explore their own. They can start here and continue to explore their own or whatever they may need, but as we know, a lot of times we'll have a group of kids who says, well, I don't know where to start, so we wanted to have a starting point that the teachers could use if students need it, and that's what this is.
And we really do appreciate the feedback, because you gave us that opportunity to discuss just the organization
Yeah,
of
that's a
it.
big part.
And that's really what came out of it,
Yes.
so it was really good feedback, and we think that, we actually removed everything else. Like, this is the only,
Okay.
teacher recommended or model or mentor ones.
So the idea is that if everyone is okay with these changes, you know, these additions, that we could look to approve it, put it on the board meeting to vote on it for approval in April. And I just need to, I think that that's fine, and the public has opportunity to speak to it tonight in the second public comment period. They'll also have opportunity to review it, because it's on the Atlas, right?
It is.
So it's on the Atlas website. They could speak to it at the next board meeting as well, because it would be an agenda item. So,
Okay.
and in between now and
Yeah.
then, they can give feedback by looking at it. But if nobody's opposed to letting it go
I'm good
to
with it.
April,
Thank
then
you.
we could do that, since we did already discuss it,
Yes.
you know,
Right.
last
Yeah.
month.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Raver.
Thank you, Mrs. Rader.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb.
All right. And so our next curriculum committee meeting is May 2nd. And that brings us back to public comment. And since we did add an update, if you didn't sign up for public comment, but having heard the update, if anyone has public comment to give, I would welcome that now. All right. Seeing none, so then we will adjourn the curriculum committee meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Alexander, if you'd let us know when the live stream's off, I'd appreciate it. All right, thank you, everyone. That means the microphones are down as well.